There's a dull kind of pain that lingers in the background. It's the feeling that your life is running behind schedule. You look around and the people you grew up with have figured something out that you somehow missed. A career that fits, a direction, a version of themselves that already knows what it is. And you're just still figuring it out. Still not sure. Carrying this quiet suspicion that maybe something is wrong with you, even though you can't quite name what. I want to tell you why that feeling might be one of the clearest signs of the kind of person Jung spent his whole career trying to understand. Carl Jung believed that certain people are not built to find themselves early. And he didn't mean that in a soft, encouraging way. He meant it clinically. Some people's minds are wired so that the process of becoming who they really are takes longer, is harder in the early years, and looks from the outside almost identical to failure. Most people build an identity pretty fast. They watch the people around them figure out what gets approval and shape themselves around that. Jung had a word for the version of yourself you build for the outside world. He called it the persona. Think of it like a mask, but one you wear so long you forget it's there. For a lot of people, that mask fits well enough. They move through their 20s with momentum, they accumulate things that look like a life, and it works. What doesn't make it into the popular version of Jung's ideas is what he also noticed. The people who build themselves fastest on the outside often hit a wall in midlife that they genuinely didn't see coming. The life they built was real. They just never checked whether it was actually theirs. Jung wrote about a type of person whose inner world runs loud. Not in a poetic sense, in a very literal one. While most people process life by moving through it, this type of person processes it by sitting with it, turning it over, asking what it means before deciding what to do about it. And in your 20s, when the whole world is basically asking you to just pick a direction and go, that tendency makes everything harder. The friction isn't that these people are rebellious or lost. It's that they can feel when something doesn't fit in a way that most people can push through. You almost commit to something, a career, a relationship, a version of yourself, and something inside you quietly refuses. You can't explain it. You might not even trust it, but the resistance is there, and it doesn't go away just because it's inconvenient. So you hesitate. You try things and stop them. You end up looking from the outside like someone who just can't get it together. And that label starts to stick even in your own head. Jung called the process of actually becoming yourself individuation, and his view was that for some people, the real work of that process happens underground, during the exact years that look like stagnation to everyone else. The mind is doing something that can't be rushed. Push it too hard and you don't get speed, you get a version of yourself that breaks later. A 2025 study by Jungian looked at 16 different psychological traits across people's entire adult lives. Things like emotional intelligence, judgment, moral reasoning, how well people resist making bad decisions under pressure. Their finding was striking. Your raw mental speed, yes, peaks in your 20s, but your overall ability to actually function well in the world, to make good calls, read people accurately, handle complexity without falling apart, that peaks somewhere between 55 and 60. Think about what that means. At 30, you are genuinely not yet the person you're going to be. At 40, still developing. The fully capable version of you hasn't shown up yet. Jung said something almost identical decades earlier, without the data to back it up. He wrote that we cannot live the afternoon of life according to the program of life's morning. He meant that the person you are in your 20s and the person you need to be in your 40s are not the same person. And treating the first half of life as the blueprints for all of it is how people end up with a life that looks perfectly fine from the outside, but feels completely hollow on the inside. There's another thing about this type of person, and this one's a bit harder to say without it sounding arrogant. They tend to see through things that other people need to believe. They pick up on the gap between what someone is saying and what they actually mean. They notice when everyone around them is excited about something that underneath feels kind of empty. They can't really turn this off. Jung described this as a burden of consciousness. More awareness doesn't just make life richer, it makes certain kinds of participation harder. How do you get genuinely excited about a goal you can already see the hollowness of? How do you perform the confidence and certainty everyone seems to expect when something in you keeps noticing the cracks? So you pull back, sometimes physically, sometimes just internally. And people read that as you being passive or difficult or depressed. Sometimes it does tip into depression. The line between pulling away from something false and genuinely struggling isn't always clear from the inside. And it's worth saying that plainly rather than romanticizing it. Around this same period, the loneliness tends to get loud. And it has a strange quality to it. It's not that you have no one around you. You can be in a room full of people and feel like none of it is quite reaching you, or you're not quite reaching them. The conversations feel like they're on a frequency you can hear, but can't quite tune into. Jung's thinking would point to this as one of the most dangerous stretches. Some people break here. They decide the inner life that's been causing all this friction isn't worth protecting and they let it go, conforming, numbing it out, picking the version of themselves that finally gets accepted somewhere. And in Jung's view, what you give up in that moment doesn't disappear. It goes underground, becomes what he called the shadow, and tends to resurface later as a resentment you can't fully explain, directed at a life you chose but never actually wanted. The people who stay with the discomfort go through something slow that can't be taught. The need for outside approval loosens. The comparison to everyone else's timeline starts to matter less. And then, somewhere in the middle of life, something settles. Jung described this as a turning inward. You stop organizing yourself around what everyone expects and start moving towards something more genuinely yours. For people who built fast early, this hits like a crisis. For the type of person we've been talking about, it tends to feel more like relief, like the world is finally catching up to where they've already been living. The Gignac and Zansanowski study, finding that overall functioning peaks in the late 50s, fits right into this. The people doing their best work at that age are often the ones who spent earlier decades building something real on the inside, even when it looked like nothing was happening. So if you felt behind for years, if your 20s were confusing and your 30s felt like everyone else had a map you never got, that standard timeline was never built for you. Jung argued that the rarest thing in human development is someone who actually becomes themselves, not the version that earns approval, the real one. And that process has almost nothing to do with when you first start looking successful. If this is the path you're on, you haven't missed the window. You're still in the middle of something that takes a long time, looks bad from the outside, and leads somewhere the faster route almost never does. One thing Jung was clear about: you can't do deep internal work when your nervous system is constantly dysregulated. If your sleep is off, your focus is scattered, your dopamine is shot from overstimulation, the kind of self-standing this video is about becomes almost impossible. I've put a link in the description and pinned comment to a bundle of 20 guides and planners built around fixing exactly that. Sleep, focus, stress, dopamine reset, minds decluttering. A week at a time, structured enough to actually follow.